artist, as opposed to who they were to actually be an artist working with?
No.
You knew exactly what they were going to be like going in?
No, I've never expected to, really. I never expect to know what people are going to be like when they're actually in the studio. I mean, some studio sessions have been harder than others. Working with Devo, who I think are one of the great bands, was however fairly difficult. I was inexperienced as a producer then. They were very experienced in knowing what they wanted from their music, and I had this terribly difficult, for me, situation of them pulling out. They had this huge chest like this, that big, that they'd shipped over from America, of all of their demo tapes. And they would pull a demo tape out and they'd say, "You hear that snare drum sound?" It had been recorded in a garage with a cheap cassette mic 14 years earlier, and the tape had been left in a pool of oil or something. And that was the sound they wanted. I'm never very good at making something happen again anyway. I just never try. If something's happened once, I think that was great, now we'll do something new. I'm no good at recreating things. And so it was a little bit difficult. But I'm proud of that record, and I think America should be very proud of Devo, actually.
Question, historical context. The paintings, you did a set of monochrome ones back in the late 70s, am I correct?
Yeah. So, sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
Basically, the question was monochrome video pieces. You did some back in the late 70s?
I think this is falling into that class of questions with limited appeal, I have to say. I don't quite get the question. I did do some painting.
Question of historical output.
Oh yeah. So I did. I had a show at what was it called? Institute of Contemporary Arts, I think, in Santa Monica. Yes.
Yeah.
And
that's how they travel.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't quite get the drift of what you were saying.
Can you talk a little bit about your collaborations with David Eagleman? About why interdisciplinary collaborations, work with pioneers in multiple fields is important maybe for our collective intellect,
Yes.
culture, and seniors?
So David Eagleman is a neuroscientist who wrote a fabulous book, which I recommend to all of you, called SUM, S-U-M, or perhaps it's SUM, I don't know, maybe Latin, I don't know. But the book it's called 40 Tales from the Afterlife, so it's just about possible ways the afterlife could be. It's very, very nice. It's sort of like a slightly Borgesian approach to thinking about it. And I like spending time with scientists because, unlike artists, they can often finish a sentence. No, actually, there is some truth to that. The whole thing about science is that you should be able to express your ideas in a public language. And if only that were true for art critics as well, what a wonderful world it would be. The fact is, scientists are used to the idea that they should be able to articulate. And quite often artists aren't. So it doesn't mean that artists aren't intelligent or anything, but they're not practiced at articulating very often, whereas scientists are. So I like conversations, so I spend quite a lot of my time with scientists. Eagleman wrote that book. His publisher, who's a friend of mine, sent me a copy, and I loved it and thought that I'd really like to do something with it. So at Sydney Opera House and at Brighton last year, we did some readings of those stories with some music that I composed especially for them. And since then, I've done a little collaboration with Eagleman. I mentioned to him once that a story about Larry Mullen, the drummer from U2, and I said that Larry it's a very complicated and long story, but the upshot of it is that I realized that Larry could detect a timing difference of 2 milliseconds. That's a tiny, tiny cigarette paper thin piece of time. And I realized that he could hear that. He could hear if something was 2 milliseconds late. I can't. He could. And I told that to Eagle, and he said, that's really amazing, because Eagle was particularly interested in time, how the brain processes time. So we set up this experiment in my studio where I invited 15 drummers over, and he tested them on a piece of software that he'd written. So that was something of that was published in the New Yorker, I think. That's it.
Pleasure to talk with you. You have produced or played on or made so many things that I absolutely love. From your early 70s records, when I was a teenager, that androgynous period that was just so important to me, to The Plateau of Mirror, that totally blew my mind, to everything you've pretty much done since. Wrong Way Up is still my favorite record of the last decade or so. And now 77 million paintings, which is astonishing to look at. Why is this that this one man in front of me has been responsible for so much the stuff that I find incredible? Is it because I have terribly good taste, or is it because you have terribly good taste? What?
I think your taste is amazing.
Thank you so much for producing so much of it. I really, really appreciate it.
I don't know the answer to the question. I'm very flattered, and I'm rather slightly embarrassed by flattery. But I really seem to have done about a quarter of what I thought I would have done by now. I seem to waste a lot of time. So from my side of the fence, what I see is somebody who spends a lot of time not getting anywhere, actually. I sometimes have months on end where I don't think anything particularly spectacular has happened. But then, interestingly, suddenly a lot of things fall into place. And I realized that those months were actually, I was digesting. You know, something was going on, I just wasn't aware of it. I find it very interesting how you process ideas that you hear. I think it's sort of a way of cheating, really. You bury an idea in your subconscious for long enough to forget that it wasn't yours. And when it comes up again, you think, oh, that was a good idea.
Thank you again.
Appreciate it.
Hi, just, it's amazing to be able to ask you a question. I just wanted to ask, in terms of generative arts, I feel like it's getting to something that's very core to human creativity and where ideas come from. And I just wanted to see if you could explain more in terms of your generative art, where the curation process and the compositional process comes in terms of like creating something that you're pleased with aesthetically and you'd be happy.
Yes. So I don't know, did I even use the term generative art during the talk? I can't remember. But that's the kind of umbrella name I had for all of this work that I would put Terry Riley's In Sea and It's Gonna Rain and the things I've done and lots of other things under this general heading. Generative means sort of self-generating, not precisely specified in advance, but it's an idea where you stop thinking of the artist as a kind of architect with the whole building complete in their head, and you start to think of them instead as a sort of gardener. Somebody has some seeds, plants them, and then lets the thing come up. And of course it's not, gardening as you know is not an exact science, so you watch with fascination as the thing develops. Now, the point is, the purists, the early generative art purists, of which Steve was one actually, Steve Wright was one, had the feeling that you had to present the experiment. Cage was another one like this. You presented the piece and you didn't mess around with it. That was it. The experiment was there and it had to be done just like that, and you left it alone. Well, you know, I don't come from quite that background. I come from a pop music background, actually, and also from a painting background, where you go back to things and you fiddle around with them until you think you've got them right, or as best as you can get them. So there's a whole thing I didn't mention about painting. Yes, of course. The whole thing, the reason that in the 1960s, nearly everybody who left art school joined a band was because art students realized long before music students, or even most musicians, realized that the recording studio was really a painting place. It was a way of painting with sound. And to art students, it was completely obvious how you would work with that new technology of multi-track recording, of music removed from performance. It made absolute sense. It was just like painting, but you were using sound as your medium. And I think that explains why so many visual artists got into music at that time, and still do, in fact, because they understand the medium as being like the one they're used to. And it also explains why hardly any music students made anything interesting at that point. They generally were impeded by their own ability to work in the old medium of music, and they weren't very able to switch to the new one. But anyway, so to answer your question, what I want to do is to set things in motion, plant my seeds, watch them work, and if I don't like the results, then I want to change the seeds and try again. So I don't, I'm not a purist in the sense of saying, oh, that was the experiment, can't touch it. It's not sacred for me, it's just a way of getting somewhere that I want to. God, what's the word? Sorry, I'm not going to get to all of you. So I'll answer the questions in monosyllables.
Firstly, I just want to say it was an honor meeting you at the Fine Peduncle show. Sorry if I interrupted anything about that.
Fine Peduncle was really good. Really good.
And you're going to see a little bit of quality drop in my question, but what do you think on the quality of music nowadays, popular, mainstream, underground, particularly in the, I'd say, dance area, with dubstep, drum and bass, stuff of that area?
I think there's never been more good music, actually. I'm constantly amazed. I'm hearing, you know, I'll hear something and I think, geez, I've never heard anything like that before. And the band has a whole following. Everybody else knows about it. So there's such a lot of great stuff around. So, of course, what has changed is that music isn't the centre of the cultural conversation any longer, like it once was. And that's partly because there's such a profusion in so many different directions. It can't be the centre. You know, there was a time when music was, because everyone listened to the same things. There wasn't that much to talk about. You had all heard Jimi Hendrix, so you would all talk about him and take a position. But nowadays, there's such a range. I mean, the novel was the same in the 1870s to 1890s. Everybody read the same books. In the 1950s and 60s, everybody saw the same films. There's always a period in the history of every medium where suddenly it becomes the centre of the conversation because everyone shares it. But, so music has lost that. It hasn't lost quality. Next one, please. Make the question very short. Don't say thanks for being here.
I was really intrigued by what you said about the brain size being minimized because we're specializing in certain areas. But then there was also the thought of microelectronics too, to where chips are doing some of the same functions but are decreasing in size. Do you think that correlates with the
Yeah.
brain as well?
So one of the things we're doing is that we're outsourcing our brains. You know, when you have an iPad and an iPhone and a BlackBerry and blah, 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 what you're doing is you're putting lots of the functions of your brain out into devices. So the physical brain is shrinking, but the actual functional brain is hugely growing. You know, we share so many other people's brains now. There's a lovely book by Matt Ridley, which is both brilliant and slightly mad, called The Rational Optimist, where he talks about this notion of the evolution of the collective mind. It's well worth a read. So the upside of the shrinking mind is the growing collective mind. Next question, please. And they're going to shoot me in a minute.
Knowing that I was coming here today, I took out the oblique strategies and shuffled them and took a card at random, asking maybe I would get something that might relate to something that you might say today. And the one I picked out was honor thy errors and human
Okay. No, this was tough. This is a problem. So, tell me. Don't sit there. Do something I can see. Don't whisper. Okay.